Dawn arrives as a rumor, not a color. On April 24th, 1945, Berlin wakes to the dull rhythm of artillery like a neighbor pounding on a wall. The city's map is a wet newspaper. Streets curl at the edges, names bleed. At Alexanderplatz, the tram lines look like the veins on the back of a hand, and the hand is trembling. Over the Spree, smoke tucks itself into arches and waits for the wind to remember its job. In a basement off Linienstrasse, a woman named Anna Weiss chalks names on the wall so the smaller ones can see. Emil, Latte, Carl stay together. Bread is divided by the width of a finger, not a knife. Upstairs, the landlady has nailed the piano shut because music feels like a lie that costs too much wood. The children learn a military word, sammelpunkt, collection point, and test it like a loose tooth. On the eastern outskirts, near Marzahn, a Red Army sapper group staggers around a corner with a purpose that smells of cordite and boiled potatoes. Sergeant Mikhail Sokolov carries a coil of det cord like a snake that has stopped being interested in biting. The map in his breast pocket is coated with oilskin and fingerprints. Storm Group, says the lieutenant, tapping shoulders as if blessing a choir. Submachine gunner, grenadier, sapper, medic. We cut the street into rooms. No running, no heroics, only procedure. Fire from a second window. We answer the third. Mikhail nods. In training, they were told changes of plan are a kind of weather. Dress for them. In the Führer bunker, where the air tastes like boiled carpet, Oberstleutnant Kruger composes a report that won't be read, lines marching across paper more neatly than the divisions on the map outside. People speak in clipped phrases with the reverence of those who have run out of options. A tea tray passes like a rumor of civilization. Relief is forming south of the city. He lies into a telephone to a district commandant. He feels the light go through the wire like cold water. The commandant doesn't argue, only asks, "How long must we hold?" Kruger doesn't say, "Until you're forgotten." He says, "Until dawn." It is always nearly dawn in here. A block from the Warschauer Bruck, a Volkssturm squad exhales anxiety in cigarette smoke and steam. Jonas, 17, a tailor's apprentice, wears a coat that belonged to someone with a wider chest and better food. The squad leader is missing 2 front teeth and too much sleep. He hands Jonas a Panzerfaust. This is not a rifle. It's a doorbell, the man says. You ring it and go to another house. Understand? Jonas nods. His hands know needles, not triggers. The Panzerfaust is a wooden promise with a firework at one end. It doesn't care about childhoods. The first Red Army barrage hits Lichtenberg with a grammar that does not require translation. Plates jump in cupboards. Plaster floats down and avalanches across a toy train. From a schoolhouse commandeered as a triage post, Dr. Zoya Kucker, a Soviet field surgeon in a looted apron and boots 2 sizes off, moves her finger down a list and decides who gets ether and who gets a song in the year. She loves the lists, not because they make things easy, but because they make cruelty legible. Keep the corridor clear, she tells the interpreter. Keep the corridor warm. Warmth is medicine that requires no medical school. Over the Oder, the last ferries of wounded and paperwork limp to field hospitals that already taste like retreat. Captain Sergei Morozov, artillery, hunches over a plotting board in a church crypt and checks the bearings to Frankfurter Allee, direct fire in grid 11C, he says, voice flat. When a heavy 152 rolls forward among gravestones and spits flame down a street named for a dream, nobody cheers. They're busy. Save 2 high explosive for the tram depot, Morozov says. He's been told depots behave like lungs. Hurt them and the city pants. Anna Weiss ventures upstairs with a soup pot and a white cloth. The cloth is not a flag. No one says that, but her building prefers to be honest with the sky. In the courtyard, 2 policemen argue about a rumor that the U-Bahn tunnels could be opened to the river to slow the fire or the enemy. The argument runs until it runs out of radio battery. Anna dips water from the rain barrel and watches ash fall on the surface and refuse to sink. Inside, Latte asks, "What's a citadel?" "A place that pretends it can't hear," Anna says. Mikhail's storm group discovers a booby-trapped doorway by doing everything right. Tap the jam, listen, smell. He kneels, cuts a wire hook to a grenade, pockets the pin. His hands shake not from fear, but from cold. Somebody studied manuals, he says, almost respectfully. They go in by the second window, exactly like the lieutenant said. A Folksturm kid darts across a hallway like a thought. The grenadier doesn't throw. He holds. "Not this one," he mutters. Procedure is not hunger. Kruger reads a situation map in which the colors don't know they're losing. A staff major boasts about a relief attempt that exists south of the Autobahn on a staff map in a room with better heating. Another man describes SS units as if adjectives were ammunition. Kruger picks up the phone and reaches Humboldt Thane Flachterm. "Your ammunition?" he asks. "Black," says the voice, which means gone. But the tower stands. "We are a lighthouse without light." "Hold," Kruger says. He is careful not to say for whom. On Karl Marx Allee, still stubbornly Frankfurter Allee to many tongues, a line of IS-2 shutters along rails laid down by defeated trolley cars. The tanks wear telegraph wires like jewelry. The commander of the lead tank, Lieutenant Cherpanov, watches a balloon of smoke rise and wonders if it contains someone he might have become. He's 25, with the back of a 50-year-old. Sure, the flank with infantry comes over the intercom. He nods and signals a squad with a lazy circle of his arm. Laziness in battle is simply economy given up on explaining itself. Jonas waits. Waiting is the hardest drill no one teaches. A T-34 appears at the end of the street. Looks larger than a room, smaller than an idea. Jonas remembers his instruction: doorbell and move. He puts the Panzerfaust over the sill, breathes out to keep the street steady, and in that breath hears a sound he hasn't heard in months. A woman singing to a baby in the building opposite. He lowers the tube. A sergeant behind him curses in a whisper and takes the shot instead. The backblast kicks plaster out of the wall like pigeons. The rocket glances off a curb, bounces, then explodes harmlessly against the doorway. Someone laughs the way you laugh when your body is choosing not to scream. "Next house," the toothless leader says. Doorbell means don't wait for an answer. At the chairite, a nurse with hands like thin rope ties a note to a child's coat. Blood type unknown. Zoya steps in with a roll of bandages and 2 miracles she won't name for fear they'll hear and stop working. She sees the nurse's hands, the note, the math. "Boil more water," she says in German, because the nurse's eyes are stuck in German today. Outside, a shell lands in the park and splashes dirt on a statue's knees. The statue does not change its mind. In a commandeered S-Bahn tunnel, refugees learn the economy of breath. Shared candles and shared rumors, both guttering. An old man claims to have seen American tanks in Zellendorf. A woman swears she heard Frenchmen singing near the radio mast. A boy says Russians have tails that fall off when you give them real coffee. The jokes are a way to keep the oxygen democratic. A policeman walks through telling people to keep to the sides. Someone asks why. "Because middle is for the train," he says, and everyone laughs because the train is a memory that thinks it's a future. Morozov's guns go to direct fire at Strasburger Platz. The city's geometry reduced to angles a barrel understands. He writes down how many shells each gun has, like writing down how many old men are left in a village. 3 smoke, 2 heat, 1 armor-piercing. Save the last for the last, he says. A young forward observer calls in calmly from a 5th-floor window with no glass. "Adjust left 2. On. Fire for effect." His voice sounds like a man deciding which log to put on a stove. In the bunker beneath the Chancellery Garden, a map is moved a centimeter so that a phrase can be said with more drama. Kruger watches a man's finger stab at a road no longer wide enough to hold its name, and wishes for the first time since 1939 that he had stayed in the post office where he had that job sorting packages with String. Packages didn't bleed. String didn't argue back. He copies an order. No withdrawal. He has to ask himself from where. Mikhail's storm group enters a tenement where the stairwell smells of soup and somebody's wedding from a lifetime ago. He steps over a bicycle and into a kitchen where 3 white plates are set on a table as if the air might sit down. In the corner, a canary chirps once, then is quiet. He takes his hat off, then immediately puts it back on, embarrassed at having remembered manners. The grenadier points at a hutch. "Trap," he whispers. Mikhail shakes his head. "Memory," he says and moves on. Jonas and his surviving neighbors drag a bench across a doorway like a line in a letter. A woman in the group distributes white armbands cut from a sheet. "Not surrender," she says. "Identification." No one argues. There's too much to agree with already. When the Soviets push into the hall, Jonas sees faces younger than his own. They are wool, mud, and instructions. One of them points the barrel of his weapon down, the international sign for "We have room for you to live if you do not make us spend it." Jonas lowers his hands slowly, as if lowering a question. On Unter den Linden, tanks chew the boulevard's root system. The Brandenburg Gate looks smaller when a machine uses it as a yardstick. Chirpanov's IS-2 rumbles past a half-fallen equestrian statue. He's dismounted, the loader quips, and somebody actually snorts. Humor survives like lichen, dry, patient, indestructible. A sniper cracks from museum attic. The coaxial machine gun answers. The museum's columns shed dust like dandruff of an era that wanted to be permanent. Zoya runs a line of triage outside a bakery, so the smell of bread can do what she can't. She has a notebook with 3 columns. Urgent, can wait, impossible. She never writes the 3rd word. She draws a dot instead, which is Kinder. A teenage boy with a burn across his sleeve, sized like a hand, holds it out. "It's nothing," he says. "It's something," she says, and smears on goose fat from a jar labeled in a language that has decided to be helpful. Kruger is summoned to the Führer's map room, where the lighting is the color of a bureaucratic dawn. He stands at attention and thinks about the old postal depot, the way parcels moved regardless of speeches. When the grooved voice says hold, he salutes the word, not the man. Outside, by the ventilation shaft, a clerk vomits neatly into a hat and then wipes it with a handkerchief with embroidered initials. People keep their elegance in odd places. Night falls like a curtain at noon. The Red Army lays flares as if setting a table, and then eats the street 1 block at a time. Mikhail's group sleeps in relay, 2 on, 2 off, one pretending to sleep so the others feel permitted. He writes a letter on the back of an order. "Found your name on a door, Mama. It was the wrong door, but I like the handwriting." He will never send it, which makes it pure. In the basement, Anna tells the children a story about a tram that got lost and found a better line. She leaves out the part where the driver lost his hands to cold, because that is not her story to tell. She ends with the tram arriving in a city where every bell is a doorbell and every door opens. By April 26th, the encirclement tightens like a belt on a thinner waist. The American and Soviet armies have shaken hands far away. Here, everyone's hands are busy with different introductions. In Wedding, the Flakturm coughs its last shells into the sky and then settles into being a building guarded by men who still talk like gunners. Morozov unrolls a new fire plan toward Alexanderplatz, a grid of fate written in pencil. He's almost out of pencils. He writes with a carpenter's stub, then with the edge of a grease pencil, then with his fingernail on his own wrist. 2 salvos, then smoke, he tells the battery. We move in the smoke. The city nods because smoke is the only privacy left. Jonas, now without a squad but still with his name, stumbles into the U-Bahn to catch his breath and finds the air already borrowed. Water creeps in somewhere. No one agrees from where, and ankles lift instinctively. A woman with a baby ties 2 corks to its wrists with thread. A man argues with a policeman about physics because it's easier than arguing about fear. A Soviet patrol appears at the tunnel mouth. Their interpreter says in German, "Up, out, streets safer." People laugh again because everyone knows how to recognize a sentence that is trying to give you hope on credit. The spree bridges become examinations with many wrong answers. Cherpanov's tank pastes on a door ripped from a bakery to add to its already absurd armor of bed frames and wardrobes. He bangs it with his fist for luck. Our Lady of Hinges, the driver says. They cross under sniper drizzle. The gunner hums a lullaby his sister once used to hush a radio. On the far side, a sign reads Kein Durchfahrt in stern letters. The tank makes a small exception. Zoya snatches 4 hours of sleep in an armchair with a broken spring that digs at her like an old grudge. She dreams of an operating theater with glass walls where everyone can see everyone else not making mistakes. She wakes to the smell of yeast and disinfectant and artillery. 2 of those are good. She washes her face in a bowl where a tulip bulb floats like a survivor that refuses to sink. She sets a broken wrist with a piece of chair leg and a strip of curtain. She tells a stubborn old man to breathe and counts with him because numbers are the one language that answers back predictably. Kruger walks through a corridor and hears a radio playing a scratchy waltz. For a second, the bunker is an ordinary place with a neighbor who annoys you politely. Then a runner informs him that communications with Army Group are intermittent. Intermittent is military for no. He grips the report until the paper threatens to become part of his palm. He goes up for air that won't help and hears far artillery like someone dragging a wardrobe across an upstairs floor. He thinks of the wardrobe on the tank he saw in a newsreel once and laughs in a way that makes the guard glance away. April 28th. The Soviet storm groups start using their assault guns like keys. One twist, one turn, not too much force or the lock will break beyond use. Mikhail follows the barrel of a Su-76 down Skonhauser Ali. The crew chief, a man who shaved yesterday by memory, holds a cigarette he doesn't have time to smoke. A caretaker emerges from a basement with a broom like a flag. "Careful," she says in Russian that a Polish aunt taught her 20 years ago. Stairs broken. The crew chief nods and kisses the unlit cigarette against his lower lip in gratitude. Anna ventures into daylight to fetch water from a fire pump that squeals like a piglet. A Soviet private guards the queue with the mild patience of someone raised in a village where queues are plots to stand in, not to tell. 1 bucket each, he says in German he learned from a prisoner he once treated for flu. Anna nods. The son remembers how to be warm for 10 minutes, then forgets again. 2 parcels arrive from nowhere. A loaf of bread wrapped in newspaper dated last summer. A folded letter addressed to a name that burned last week. People read the date like a joke whose punchline no one can afford. In the bunker, Kruger reads one last communique that says nothing with ceremony. He signs it as if that could make it true. In the corridor, a young courier girl adjusts her collar and asks, "Will we be evacuated?" He opens his mouth to say yes and hears himself say no. She nods as if she had ordered that answer and finally received it. He sits at a desk, takes out the pocket knife his father gave him when a boy was allowed such things, and makes a notch in the wood. The desk is not his, the room is not his, the city is not his, the notch is his. April 29th dissolves into a thick night. Somewhere in Mit, Morozov orders a final smoke before pushing to the Sprinzel. The flares turn the river into a wrought iron fence. The infantry go over it as if visiting neighbors after curfew. Cherpanov's tank parks under a balcony from which laundry once fluttered. Now it's just prayer flags, bits of paper caught on wires. "Tomorrow," says the driver. "Tomorrow," says Cherpanov, as if making an appointment with a day that might not show. Mikhail climbs to a top floor to spot for his group and find a rooftop garden. 3 terracotta pots with nothing in them but the stubborn idea of green. He stares east. The horizon glows like a stove door left ajar. He thinks of his mother's kitchen in Ryazan and the way she measured flour by eye. No scales, only judgment. Wars like that, he thinks, too much and it burns, too little and it doesn't rise. A shell falls near enough to interrupt nostalgia and far enough to leave it intact. He ducks anyway, because prudence is what courage uses to get more done. In the U-Bahn, water rises to the shins. Refugees climb the slope like the inside of a throat. Jonas shoulders a child who isn't related to anyone and leads him up to the street where the air feels sharper but more honest. At the mouth of the station, a Red Army medical orderly hands him a blanket without asking where he belongs. Jonas doesn't know. The blanket chooses for him. April 30th. Maybe coming edges the windows with that gray that looks like sleep about to give up. In the bunker, a dog barks. In a school, a blackboard still says mate, the numeral 7 chalked with confidence. In the Tiergarten, a tank sits under a chestnut tree that doesn't care who is winning. Morozov receives a coordinate scribbled wrong and corrects it with a pencil that has bitten marks. No mistakes at noon, he says, then checks his watch. It is not noon. He laughs once. Zoya pulls a splinter out of a palm with tweezers and tells the boy attached to the palm to think of a river. Any river. He can't. She names 5 and lets him borrow one. Kruger sits with a stack of forms that demand dates and signatures. He fills them in with today's date, as if that were a gift. A loud sound nearby is not a shell. He looks at the ceiling and thinks of music, how sometimes a conductor drops his hands and the orchestra stops not because the notes are over, but because the permission is. He goes into the corridor and listens to the city. It is quieter. He tries to decide whether that means worse. He decides it means honest. Mikhail's group moves toward the Reich Chancellery Garden, past voiced rumors. This building's done. That bunker's empty. A radio playing tango alone in a room. The men are silent in the way of people who have used their words well all day and want to save the rest for after. They pass a wall with bullet holes that look like buttons on a coat none of them can afford. A white towel appears on a stick from a window. It wavers. It is either truce or laundry. A woman's face follows, her hand flat, the universal sign of don't shoot. We have already been dead enough. The lieutenant nods and raises his palm back. The gesture is a bridge between languages that have run out of adjectives. At Humboldt-Thane, the Flak Tower's manager, who used to be a tram inspector, orders the last ladder rolled up. No more climb, he says. The men look relieved to be told the limit. He writes in his log, close for war. He will keep the log. After all this, he will keep the log. Night again, this time with thinner darkness. In a cellar on Dorotheenstrasse, Anna folds the chalk names on the wall into a small cloth and ties it with string. She stops before the last knot and unties it again, then reties it slowly. She has made something not useful but necessary. On the street above, a Soviet patrol pauses at a crossroad, listening for orders that come from the way the air moves. Somewhere a piano lid is being pried open with a kitchen knife. The city inhales once, as if trying to get bigger before the next sentence. Berlin wakes on April 30th to a sky the color of dishwater and the feeling of a building inhaling before it collapses. Somewhere, a siren gives up halfway through its sentence. The streets are written in chalk and smoke. The day decides to be short. In the garden above the bunker, the trees of the Tiergarten where soot the way old men wear eyebrows. Sergeant Mikhail Sokolov leads his 4-man storm group along the wall behind the chancellery, stepping over bricks that still remember their job. ASU 76 nudges a gate with its barrel, polite and persistent. The hinges remember they are metal and complain accordingly. Same drill, the lieutenant says. Doorway is a funnel. Stairwell is a chimney. Room is a question. We answer with grenades, not speeches. Mikhail nods, hands already doing the slow choreography of fuses and pins. He glances at a shattered window and sees himself briefly, smaller and older. He chooses to be smaller. Inside, the corridors smell of damp paper. A sign points confidently toward rooms that no longer exist. They pass an office with a hat on the chair and a pen rolling toward the edge of a desk. The pen stops. The rules of physics still hold. Clear, whispers the grenadier. Clear, echoes Mikhail, and hears his voice like a pencil line, thin, unbroken. At Alexanderplatz, Captain Sergei Morozov lays out a final fire plan on a piece of plywood because all the tables have gone to war. He draws boxes for squares and crosses for machine guns and writes smoke in Cyrillic and in block German for the benefit of the liaison huddled beside him. The liaison nods as if smoke is a language he once knew but hasn't spoken since school. One battery to cover the tram barn, Morozov says. We push under it, like in rain. You move when thunder drowns your footsteps. A gun captain, face chapped into geography, asks. And after? Morozov taps the map where the ink has pooled. After is a street, and then another street. The men accept this as optimism. Under Dorotheenstrasse, Anna Weiss has tied her chalked list with string and placed it in a tin where biscuits used to live. She ladles soup into chipped bowls, potato, onion, a generosity of bay leaf, and says each child's name with the exact same warmth, because fairness is a kind of food. Rumors about water in the tunnels arrive like tired cousins. Everyone makes room. A knock in the stairwell, a voice in accentless German. We are medics. We will not take your men if you don't point guns. The door opens on Dr. Zoya Kucker and two orderlies with red crosses painted on breadboards. Zoya's boots are muddy. Her eyes are steady. Anyone with fever? With cough? With red lines on their limbs? She asks. When no one knows what to say, she smiles like a mother with bad news and better soup. Then we will take the ones who cannot walk. You will help us carry. Anna nods and raises her hand. I can carry the small end. They carry a man whose leg is the wrong color up the stairs that complain at each step. The street is a wind of orders. Zoya threads through it with the logic of someone who has moved too many bodies to be impressed by urgency. At the Warschauer Bruck, Jonas helps a Soviet sapper coil telephone line under an overhang where snow would form if the weather were still in charge. The sapper grins through dirt. Good hands, he says in bad German. I sew, Jonas replies. You will sew streets, the sapper says, and gestures to the mess as if it were cloth that simply needs a pattern. AT 34 clangs past with a door strapped to its side that advertises Konditorei in golden script. The tank's crew have stuck a feather into the number stenciled on the turret. It waggles with each shot, absurd and precise. Jonas laughs, without permission from his fear. Doorbell, he says quietly, remembering the instruction that turned life into a rule. Doorbell and go. You rang, the sapper says, not understanding, and slaps Jonas on the shoulder like a coach. Down in the Führer bunker, Oberstleutnant Kruger writes his last clean report. He decides to date it by the light coming through the vent rather than the clock on the wall. He copies an order about holding without moving his hand, a trick he learned at the post office when his boss wanted speed without smears. He is called to the map room, where hope has been replaced by etiquette. He salutes, listens, leaves. The corridor wobbles with footsteps that have memorized the turns. Near the kitchen, a cook is boiling noodles in water that tastes of yesterday. He offers Kruger a spoonful. Kruger shakes his head, but smiles because someone is still cooking. He returns to his desk and takes out the pocket knife again and notches the wood once more. It looks like a tally no one will ask about. By noon, Brandenburg Gate is framed by smoke like a portrait in a house on fire. Lieutenant Cherpanov's IS two treads carefully, the driver reading the cobbles by feel through the seat of his trousers. The loader names streets like saints as they pass. Unna den Linden, Ebertstrasse, Dorotheenstrasse. A burst claps from the Zughaus attic. The coaxial gun answers with a blunt, convincing sentence. Dust pours down in quiet applause. The tank stops to let infantry flow around it. The men are footprints already and soon they are print again. A child appears between two pillars, hat too big, eyes too wide, and an elderly woman yanks him back without looking. Cherpanov glances at the driver. The man shrugs with his eyebrows. You cannot armor a street against everything. In the U-Bahn, the water reaches knees. People ascend in a patient, indecent intimacy. Jonas hoists the same toddler as before onto his hip. The child is happy to belong to whichever adult is upright. At the entrance, a Soviet medical orderly in a cap too big for his ears hands out folded gray blankets. Up, he says kindly. Street better. A woman laughs at the obviousness and then nods because obvious things are rare. Jonas tucks the blanket around the child and feels the weight of a future without a uniform. In the chairite, Zoya treats a man with a shrapnel kiss across his temple and writes lives in a notebook, so private even she will not read it later. A German nurse asks if she will stay after the war. Zoya says, I have a grandmother who thinks the Volga is the whole world. The nurse nods as if a river were a person you could be loyal to. They both laugh when the ether bottle farts like a trumpet. Laughter is antiseptic that never runs out. April tilts toward May with a cough. The Reichstag looms like a burnt cake with too much icing. Mikhail's group is not assigned to take it, which suits him. Let others climb the stairs for photographs. His business is plumbing. Courtyards, cellars, the angles that decide whether a doorway becomes a murder. He unspools deck cord along a balcony that lists like a barge and tucks it like a sheet around a stubborn lump of masonry. The charge asks him for a number. He gives it one that has worked before. The blast is domestic, effective, the sound of a door unlearning a keepsake. Through, the lieutenant says. Through, Mikhail confirms, and the word feels like more than a preposition. In the bunker's stale afternoon, someone turns up a radio and everyone stands still for a voice that has run out of verbs. Kruger takes off his cap because etiquette has to go somewhere. When the voice stops, no one speaks. Even lies need air. The room has none. A runner arrives with a message that is not on any form. He looks 16 and 50 at once. General says capitulation talks. The boy whispers as if the word might break. Kruger nods. The boy swallows and adds, white flags to be shown. He holds up a pillowcase as proof that the world still contains fabric. Kruger pockets his pocket knife and stands. Find a stick, he says gently. Not too short. Dignity is in the length. May 1st begins with artillery modesty and street corner negotiations. On Leipziger Strasse, a woman ties her lace curtains to a broom handle and leans out. Across the way, a Red Army private looks up, wets his lips, and lowers his rifle. The curtain lifts in a little wind no one ordered. Captain Morozov orders smoke at Spreensel and watches the city turn into a photograph of itself. Infantry move in the gray like men borrowing a neighbor's hallway. A burst from the museum, a burst back, silence that tastes like honest exhaustion. We will need bridges, Morozov says aloud to no one. After war is over, bridges and bread. A gun sergeant adds, and pencil factories. They both smile, feeling extravagant. Lieutenant Cherpanov parks his tank under a balcony where flower boxes used to practice patience. A German man in a coat that remembers better meals approaches cautiously with his hands at half-mast. We have wounded, he says. We have water, and we have bandages, and we have a piano. Cherpanov, not the correct person to decide anything, nods anyway. Bring them, he says. The wounded, not the piano. The man nods and then, after 3 steps, turns back. We will bring tea, he says. For your men. His voice almost remembers hospitality. Mikhail's group skirts the Reich Chancellery Garden and stumbles on a scene held together by habit. A clerk stacking papers. A typist rolling a sheet from a dead typewriter with the reverence of a sacristan. 2 guards arguing in whispers about routes no longer available. Stay, the lieutenant tells them. and the word has the weight of a verdict and the mercy of a lullaby. A door opens onto the garden where the air is having trouble keeping its job. Someone has hung out laundry, a towel, a shirt, a blank flag. A breeze moves them toward the east, as if pointing. Zoya establishes a mixed ward in a school gymnasium where the lines of a basketball court still teach people how to stand in order. She directs cots. Red Army left, civilians middle, Wehrmacht right. The difference now administrative. A little boy wanders between rows looking for the letter on his mother's coat. Zoya kneels. What letter did she have? She asks. B, he says. For bread. Then we are both looking for bread, she replies. She ties a paper B to his sleeve and brings him to Anna, who has come up to exchange lists for blankets and stay to hold hands. That evening, the U-Bahn breathes out its last panic as families reclaim stairwells and sidewalks and meaningful shadows. Jonas repairs a torn coat with thread scrounged from a sewing kit, whose owner kept it in a tobacco tin wrapped in a love letter. He stitches quietly on the stoop while a Soviet sentry pretends not to notice tears. When he finishes, he hands the coat back to a man who cannot make his mouth say thanks. Not because he is ungrateful, but because his lips have been busy with survival. You'll pay later, Jonas says, in bread or by listening when I talk. The man nods. Debt is a currency that works even when banks don't. May 2nd wakes to paper. White flags flutter from windows like freshly laundered verbs. General Weidling's capitulation orders rippled down corridors and across streets, carried by men with armbands and patience. A Soviet trumpet tries to play something formal and fails charmingly. People cry because the mistake is human. Morozov sends runners, not shells. Cherpanov shuts down his IS, too gently, as if not to wake anyone. Mikhail sits on a step with his helmet in his lap and looks at the scuffed paint like a face he almost recognizes. Finished? Asks the grenadier. Ended, Mikhail says. Finishing takes longer. They stand when an older man in a once-tailored coat approaches holding a folded sheet on a broomstick. The white is dirty. The gesture is clean. Who do we give it to? The man asks in schoolbook Russian. The lieutenant raises his hand and then, because it feels right, offers the man a seat on the step. The man sits without surprise. Protocol has been replaced by decency. In the bunker, Oberstleutnant Kruger signs a paper that says what everybody's faces already say. He leaves his cap on the desk. He carries a flag made from a tablecloth to the surface, where the garden is a geometry of craters and stubborn tulips. At the top of the stairs, a Soviet lieutenant with red dust on his shoulders nods, and Kruger nods back. They exchange 2 sentences, one about unit locations, one about medical supplies. The words are the right shape. Then Kruger walks into the light and discovers it is not brighter, only less shy. He sees a boy carrying a little boy. He sees a woman with a bucket. He sees a tank that looks tired. He sees himself reflected in a puddle and decides to be smaller in future. By noon, the guns stop near enough to call it silence. It is not. Somewhere a last burst, a last refusal, a door slammed by impulse. But the city hears itself for the first time in a week. Pigeons negotiating roofs, a faucet that forgot to be turned off, a piano lid finally pried open. In a school gym with chalk lines like commandments, Zoya sits on a chair between rows and lets her hands be still. A woman brings her tea in a tin cup with a dent that kisses her lip. Zoya laughs and says thank you in a German with too much Volga in it. The woman smiles because language is an instrument. You could be out of tune and still play something worth hearing. Anna reads names from her tin and checks them against faces that are more or less where they belong. She adds 2 names that arrive attached to hands and writes found beside them. She deletes nothing. She closes the tin and places it on a shelf like a family Bible. Jonas helps a Soviet mechanic change a track link on AT-34, and the mechanic helps Jonas lift a sewing machine from cellar. They become each other's tools, which is the opposite of being enemies. Morozov eats bread and onion and writes no fire in thick, satisfying letters. He thinks about bridges and pencils and how many logs it takes to heat a room. He does the math and finds it comforting. Cherpanov leans his back against his tank and closes his eyes. The engine ticks as it cools. The city ticks as it warms. He thinks of a farm road and a girl who can carry 2 buckets without spilling either. He promises the street he will drive carefully. Mikhail unrolls a coil of wire and lays it across a doorway and then laughs at himself. Habit needs a minute to catch up with peace. Kruger sits on a garden bench that has survived and takes out his pocket knife and does not make a notch. He puts the knife away and looks at his hands. They're not clean. He decides not to wash them yet. The first official word people remember is Wasser. Water trucks back toward courtyards. Hoses snake over thresholds like pets who found their way home. Brat follows, bread that tastes like yesterday's promises. Kinder follows, children coaxed into light with sugar and stories. Zeit comes last, time measured not by shells but by sunlight on floors. By afternoon, a man in a cap with a red band reads a notice on a street corner. Curfew, registration, surrender of arms, ration cards. A woman whispers, "We have done this before," and someone answers, "We will do it differently." The sentence is not hopeful or cynical, merely practical. At dusk, the Brandenburg Gate breathes, relieved to be architecture again. A soldier plucks at a bent string on a looted guitar and finds a chord that does not belong to any nation. People stop, listen, and do not ask for papers. That night, the city sleeps in patches like a quilt. In one patch, a grandmother finally turns the lamp down 2 clicks instead of 4. In another, a sentry leans against a lamppost and counts trains that are not running. In another, a dog dreams about a field that smells of nothing. It is almost quiet enough to hear the spree remember how to be water. Anna dreams of the tram, a new line with new stops. Bread, water, school, paper, music, forgiveness. In the morning, she will go to the allotments and look for mint. Jonas dreams of a workshop with windows, a bench he sands smooth, a line of coats waiting for seams. In the morning, he will find thread in the ruins of a haberdashery, and so for anyone whose coat has a story. Zoya dreams of an operating room with clean light and a shelf of soap that never runs out. In the morning, she will write to a grandmother by the Volga and say, "I am eating enough." The children smile with all their teeth when you give them a spoon to hold. Morozov dreams of a raft of bridges across a map and a pencil sharpener that never breaks the lead. In the morning, he will be sent elsewhere. He will leave the plywood fire plan leaning against a wall, and someone will use the other side for a list of school books. Cherpanov dreams of roads that end in fields and of engines that shut down at dusk by choice. In the morning, he will be told to move his tank to a square where people are already planning a market. Mikhail dreams of doors that open from the second knock and never have wires tied to the hinge. In the morning, he will carry away the debt cord like a snake that has decided to hibernate indefinitely. Kruger dreams of a postal counter, string, a stamp pad, customers with parcels, and no questions. In the morning, he will line up with other men and hand in a pistol that no longer knows what to do with itself. The clerk will write his name, and for the first time in a week, the ink will not smear. Afterward, what remains when streets stop giving orders? Procedure survived. The habits that took Berlin, storm groups, smoke screens, direct fire grids, medics with lists, turn into reconstruction habits, waterworks, bread routes, vaccination lines, registration desks. Craft beats, chaos both ways. Bridges and pencils. Engineering and paperwork replaced artillery as the city's verbs. The same men who plotted salvos now plotted tram schedules and ration days. It mattered who held the pencils, and that they were sharp. Mixed wards, mixed futures. A school gym printed the first truce. Red Army left, civilian center. Wehrmacht right became patience, names, doses. Mercy resk in the grid. Small debts. Amended coat for a loaf later. A blanket for a story. Cities restart on microcredit of decency. Scale hope. Nobody promised years. People promised tomorrow at 10. It was enough. If you walk into Den Linden now, the lime trees still try to keep the street in tune. On quiet mornings, you can almost hear April's last week under the hum of buses and bicycle bells. The sound of a city learning again how to tell itself what to do, and then doing it block by block, bunker by bunker, until verbs like fetch, carry, boil, print, repair, teach outnumber the ones that began with fire.